Hello, fellow fantasy sports fans. Welcome to MFSN The Hub's Fantasy Baseball Strategy Show, Thursdays at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. I'm Dr. Dan Ratner, and I'm here as always with Casey, Vlad to the Bone, Shine Bold, but no Ross the Boss, only Casey.
Only me today. It is good to be here. I can do, hey, everybody, if you want, but I'm not going to.
Yeah, well, nobody can do it quite like Ross, but you're enough for me. It's always been that way. Let's talk about the headlines coming in. As we know, fantasy baseball, and this is true whether it's head-to-head or rotisserie, it changes week to week so much. I sometimes can't believe it. You know, when I first started playing fantasy sports, I didn't realize how much things were going to change all the time. Now,
Yeah,
if you look at like the best players in baseball, the list is not what you expect it to be. It never is. So let's talk about the headlines of the week. If somebody were just coming in, dipping into the season, and we needed to find out what's happening, what would be the top things you'd be talking about right now?
Ellie De La Cruz would obviously be one with his 26 steals or whatever he already has on the season. Injuries.
That's as many as some teams.
Yes. Detroit lost yesterday. Before yesterday, they had 4 teams in the AL Central 500 or better. And we were talking about them being the worst division maybe ever.
Right. It didn't seem that way.
The Phillies running away with the East right now, which is pretty impressive. They're already 3 games up out there. The Dodgers have a 7.5 game lead. There's just some things are predictable, you know. Not as many big injuries happening lately. You had Jung-Hoo Lee in San Francisco. That's probably the biggest injury of the last week.
It's actually been a nice time with injuries, and we talked about this last week. We're getting more information about guys coming back from injury right now. So let's talk a little bit about that. Who's coming back from injury? Who do you have your eye on?
Well, who's coming back?
Let me actually, I'll start you off just to take you off the hot seat for a second. You can weigh in a second, but you know, my team in our dynasty league had a lot of major injuries, and just now I'm starting to get to look at, you know, the pleasure of getting some of them back. So one of them, Josh Jung, actually threw a baseball recently. It was extremely exciting for me.
Yeah, Royce Lewis for me is starting to do some running. Byron Buxton, you know, the guy I can't quit for some reason. I'll draft him in the 20th round of almost anything.
Right.
He might be coming back. Some pitchers have recently come back. John Means, Kyle Bradish in Baltimore. You've got Garrett Cole ramping up his bullpen. He's throwing bullpens now.
When is he supposed to be due back, or is there not a timeline yet?
There's not a timeline yet. He's only throwing bullpens now. I would assume it's still probably middle to end of June at the earliest at this point.
I'm Walker
Buehler came back a few weeks ago. So we got some big names.
Yep.
Getting healthy.
I'm also waiting on Tristan Casas. He looks like he's making progress. It's so funny. I don't know how you experience this, Casey, but like, especially if you don't have tons and tons of teams, you may not even have the storyline of certain players. You're like siloed in on your team.
It's 100% true.
If you ask me about injuries, I can tell you about Josh Jung, Matt McClain, Tristan Casas, Wilson Contreras. I can tell you about the guys that I have. Who are the guys on your team that have been?
Oh gosh, if I go to in Ross's Yahoo League, I actually have, because he only has 2 IL spots.
Right.
I actually have 3 starters on the IL. Royce Lewis, Francisco Alvarez, Wyatt Langford, Cabrian Hayes are all IL.
A lot of IL guys. Meanwhile, we've got Ross. He's joined us on the road. And by the way, Ross is in Ohio right now, where I'm from and where I live. Ross says, Dr. Dan #1. I'm sure that's not a diss to you, Casey.
I don't take it that way. It's fine.
I appreciate it. So, but we'll see. If Ross then says Casey #2, it might mean
then maybe. Congrats on your daughter's graduation, by the way.
Yes, congratulations, Ross. We're thinking of you. We miss you. We look forward to seeing you next week. So, yeah, in terms of these silos, speaking of silos, in terms of my team, today, I have to decide whether to pitch Christian Javier. I'm going to ask you that question, Casey.
Ooh.
When a pitcher, I don't know if you saw this, but he absolutely got obliterated last week. And not only did he get obliterated, he was throwing like 89 miles an hour. Everything looked wrong. There's no way I would be starting him in almost any situation, but I don't know if I can sit him because he's playing Oakland.
Oh, you got to start him against Oakland.
I think I have to. You know, like what else am I going to do? Hopefully he won't get obliterated, but you
Yeah,
got to.
but the upside is worth the risk this early in the season with a pitcher.
I
I
think
think.
so. I mean, my pitching numbers have been tough. I just had climbed my way back into things, and then Kevin Gausman is another guy who just blew up my numbers.
Yeah.
What do you make of Kevin Gausman in this?
His
Can we
his
trust him?
velocity is climbing a little bit, so that makes me feel a little bit better about him. He was one of my top 5 starters going into the season.
Me
Like, I
too.
had him up there, and now who thought it would be Jose Barrios, your favorite.
Oh, here we go.
But I still believe in him. When it's a veteran pitcher who's not veteran like Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander age, I trust that they'll figure it out. But I would probably bench him till he gave you 1 or 2 good kind of starts.
Speaking of Scherzer, he had some problems coming back from the IL. It looks like he might be past those mostly. I know you're not super high on him, but is he somebody that you would put it in, somebody that you would stash?
I
That's a no.
probably
That's a
wouldn't.
no.
I just
Yeah.
no. I just
That's
now
funny. I mean, he has such a great track record.
I know,
I
but
still
he's
want to stash him.
40, isn't he? Or
I believe
39?
he's 39. He may have turned 40 at some point. Chris Atwater says Williams, and Kwan are a ways away. So, which
Devin
Williams are we
Williams?
talking about?
I'm assuming one's Devin Williams,
Yes,
right? Or Gavin Williams,
and maybe
or
Ted Williams.
and it
Oh,
could.
okay.
Well, he's a ways away. He's waiting for cryogenics.
I mean,
to catch
he
up.
was cryogenically frozen. So, I feel bad saying that to a Red Sox fan. No, I love Ted Williams. I mean, no diss on him. Just noticing the name. Then Chris Atwater says Ricky Tiedemann, working his way back, but will not be relevant this year. It does sound that way to me. Casey, what's your take on that?
I don't think he'll be relevant this year.
I don't think you're him.
Yeah, no.
So it was Devin and Gavin Williams, by the way, and he said Ted is a long shot.
Yes, it very much
I
is.
think we all agree, Chris.
Other players who are coming back, Grayson Rodriguez could be activated this weekend. That's a big one. Blake Snell, how do you feel about him, Dan? He was dominant in his rehab start, and he's got 1 left.
I want to call Blake Snell the golden handcuffs. You can't cut him if you have him, really. I mean, his strikeout upside is so ridiculous. And, his other numbers can be great. He's won 2 Cy Youngs, but it's hard. It's very hard to trust him. I mean, am I going to pitch him his next time out? I doubt it. No. Maybe if he's pitching against the A's, I will.
Yeah.
But, one problem I have with him in our dynasty league is we have quality starts instead of wins. So you always need to know what your league is like.
That doesn't help because he rarely goes deep enough to get the quality start.
He just walks too many guys to ever get to 6 innings. So Chris Atwater loves Snell, though.
So
Chris,
you should trade him.
Tell us why. I should.
Let's talk trade.
We're talking trade right here. So now he hears my process.
Wow, this would be like an epic show if you guys worked out a trade on the show.
So let's. This is a kind of topic that we talk about on the show that I often like, which is the emerging ace, the one you didn't see coming. To me, at this point, Ranger Suarez is that. I mean, I don't know how you could.
Yeah, I mean, he would have. He's certainly the first 2 months of the season is absolutely.
Now there are guys that won't keep that up, and like especially hitters. Like remember when Michael Conforto was going crazy, and I was like, well, we've seen this before. This is not going to happen.
Yeah.
But Ranger Suarez, we've never seen him pitch like this. We've never seen him pitch this much. And
now the questions, but pitchers are different than hitters when we look at that breakout stuff, because once they hit that 135 inning, 130 inning level, if they're not used to going 200, 150, 175 innings, you get that tired arm. Can he fight through it? That'll be interesting. I think.
Go ahead.
He's certainly a first half ace. The same thing you can say about Imanaga, the rookie, although rookie, right? In Chicago has been amazing as well. Tyler Glasnow, who's never pitched more than 107 innings in a season, or I forget what the total was. I'll have to look that up. Already at 57 innings, and he's just been studly dominant.
Right. I mean, I agree with you on the one hand that with pitchers, they could hit that wall. But at the same time, I also think that when pitchers really have it going, sometimes they can just be that way for the whole season. They just have figured it out. Sometimes it's their
Yeah,
they
and I
found a
hope
way to
they're
get their
right.
velocity up. What's that?
What are your thoughts on Seth Lugo?
Yeah, I mean Seth Lugo, he's somebody I had my eye on coming into the season.
But you weren't expecting this. He's like the
I
number
mean, who could be
16
expecting
ranked
this?
fantasy player right now.
No, I mean, who could possibly be expecting this? But I mean, here's my take on Seth Lugo that makes me more cautious. He has pitched great, but this is Ross always teases me that the Dan rule is you got to have more strikeouts than innings pitched.
Yes.
Lugo doesn't have that. So when I look at a guy like, I mean, Tariq Skubal and Seth Lugo are ranked back to back.
Yeah, and you and I talked about Skubal all preseason
and we know we would rather have Skubal for sure. Meanwhile, Chris Atwater teasing me here. He says Jose Berrios is for real, Dan. Casey, is he for real?
I think, I mean, look, the guy you drafted him in the high a few years ago because he was so good in Minnesota. Like maybe he lost his mechanics for a couple seasons and figured it out. We know the guy's got the stuff for it.
Okay, I'm just going to make a counter argument, even though I will fully admit I'm probably somewhat biased on Jose Berrios based on my experience. But first of all, he's not striking out a lot of guys.
No.
I just think he's a blow up waiting to happen. Just be careful with Berrios, I would say. All right, will Edwin Diaz turn it around?
I don't understand what you mean by turn it around. His numbers are pretty darn good. The 3.24 ERA is not great because he blew a big save the other day, but that's the nature of being a closer. You blow one save poorly and your ERA looks terrible. He still has below a 1 WHIP and 25 strikeouts in 16 innings. It's not his fault that the Mets aren't putting him in a position to get saves. He's got 5 saves. He's 5 for 6, I believe, on the season.
I mean, this could be a thing where I see, Chris, you actually have him in our Yahoo League. So you may just be frustrated with the fact that he's not getting a lot of saves, but he seems to be pitching well. Meanwhile,
the Cardinals are awful, and Helsley leads the league in saves. It just depends on how you're winning games and when you can use your bullpen. Sometimes it's crap luck.
I think last week Kyle Finnegan was leading the league in saves.
Yeah.
The Nationals. Meanwhile, how about a Diaz who really needs to turn around?
Ooh.
Alexis Diaz.
Yeah, he's been terrible.
What do you do with him? I mean, is he cuttable? I have to ask.
Who was the closer that we all owned at one point? Like 50. Fernando, was it?
Fernando Rodney.
Yes. Who would be notoriously getting 25 to 30 saves, but he had a 1.8 WHIP and a 5.2 ERA. And you were like stuck with this guy because you needed the saves. Diaz has 7 saves. It's not like his numbers in that respect are terrible. He's striking out more than a batter an inning, but oh my God, the other ones are awful.
Yeah, Fernando Rodney was like a pact with the devil. It was like you knew sometimes you just had to make it.
He'd shoot the arrow when he made a save, but it was the bases were loaded and 1 run was in.
It's ridiculous. But, I mean, it's going to depend on your league, but we have a dynasty league where it's actually 10 teams, so it's thinner. And there are times
I don't think closers are worth as much.
Closers aren't worth anything in dynasty for keeping. But even for rostering in a 10-team league, is Alexis Diaz rosterable at this point?
Yes.
I think that yes, that's exactly the way to say it. It's like you gotta hold your nose and keep rostering him.
This is the worst drink I've ever had. Here, try it. Exactly. How many times you did that when you were in college?
Actually, so you know that I sometimes say, who's your annoying closer of the week? Mine is Alexis Diaz right now. He's driving me crazy. And I've just benched him. He's still on my team.
Yeah.
But he's benched for now. Now, here's the most frustrating thing about him for me. If you look at his stats, I think it was how many games ago? Give me a second. Let me see this. It was just a few games ago that his ERA was like 3.50. Now his ERA is 6.75.
Yeah.
And that's the tightrope that you're walking with these closers.
For me, it's James McArthur.
What's that?
James McArthur still getting the saves in Kansas City, but a 7.7 ERA in the last week.
That's right. And listen, closers can lose their jobs so fast. If you have a hitter who's hitting 100 for 2 weeks, he's probably going to keep his job if he's got a solidified job in general. Closers can really lose it fast. I want to jump back to emerging aces. I noticed
Okay.
that you had hung on to Garrett Crochet. I
I
don't know if you've
did.
noticed, but he's had a good couple weeks here.
Yes, I had him on my bench for a while and then started him again a couple weeks ago. So
So is he an emerging ace?
no, I don't think so.
Is he a useful fantasy starter for the rest of the year?
He's a useful starter at least for the first half of the season. How's that? I'll
Okay,
say
so
that
you're going to
because
watch when he hits that wall.
right, because he's a relief pitcher. He hasn't been a starter in the majors. So
Right.
I don't expect him to pitch more than 115 innings this year. So I'm not gonna like hold my breath,
Yeah,
like
no, I totally get it. I mean,
Bailey Ober, I believe in. I think he's turning it around as if you want somebody who's young, who's going to be upside. I think Max Fried, for those who haven't paid attention after Max Fried's first 3 starts where he was just awful, the last month and a half, he's been one of the best pitchers in baseball. If you can find a naive Max Fried owner, go get him.
Yeah. Just don't offer Kevin Pillar for him. I understand Kevin Pillar has batted .483 in the last 2 weeks, but nobody's
somebody
trading
do
Kevin
that?
Pillar. No,
Oh.
it did not happen. I'm just
like,
saying
wow.
it can happen.
Nice.
Now,
Yes.
Chris has a follow-up on Edwin Diaz. He says Edwin has 1 save since April 20th. Woo! Gonna keep him, but he has been pretty unsettled recently. So you got to keep him. He's pitching well. He's
I'll
in
take
the closer
him.
spot.
You want Jason Foley? I'll give you a Jason Foley for him. Got a lot more saves and he's pitching well in Detroit, but I'd still much rather have Edwin Diaz.
Who have you noticed is playing really, really well? We can jump between hitters and pitchers. I'm going to jump back to hitters for a second. Who of hitters is hitting really well right now?
Recently? Well, Brent Rooker's been insane.
I was going to ask about him. Yeah.
He
did this last year around this time.
Yeah, he's a good little player, and yes, he's in Oakland and that's horrible. But
when he's hitting, he hits a ton.
But if you're going to hit 400 and, hit 2 home runs a week, driving 15 runs, driving a run a game or a run a day, yeah.
It's pretty hard to resist. I mean, Brent Rooker, listen, I'm not saying, I know Brent Rooker is quite likely to end up on the waiver wire at some point. But should he be on the waiver wire right now?
No.
Absolutely not. I
Never.
mean, he's destroying the ball. So that's actually a question that I have. In our other league, the Dynasty League, I think I need to pick up Rooker. He's actually still out there.
Is he? Yeah, then he's worth it. I mean, I haven't looked that closely.
I mean, the way he's playing, I'm going to do it. But I have to figure out who to cut. That's
my problem. And I'm such a sucker. I still look at minors.
Well,
I'm still trying to change all my prospects.
Of course.
The Yankees, yeah. I agree with you, Chris. Got to pick up Verdugo. Yankees. Although I'll say this. Jason Dominguez started his rehab assignment this week. They say he's just 3 weeks away. When he comes back, he's going to be the starting center fielder, which means probably Juan Soto in right and Aaron Judge in left. Verdugo might get left out a few times because Stanton's batting .245, which doesn't sound great, but he's got 9 home runs, and .245 these days is a power hitter.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what is league average now? Do you know?
I don't know.
See if you can Google that. I want to find out because, I mean, .245 when we were growing up, that's a terrible average. That'll probably get you benched. But I see Chris has a comment about our Dynasty League. She says, in our Dynasty League, I let Lane Thomas and Dansby Swanson go. See you later. Yeah, I mean, especially
right now, the league average is 239.
The league average is 239. I mean, do you remember how bad a 239 batting average used to be?
I know. Steve Balboni.
That's Steve Balboni territory for sure. He was maybe more like 226, but that's not far away.
It made Adam Dunn look like a hitter.
Exactly.
The donkey or whatever they called him.
I noticed we missed a comment about Brandon Pfaadt. Brandon Pfaadt has been great. The last 4 games, picked him up and think he will continue his momentum. Well, this is the kind of player that I often do really like to invest in. I mean, we all call it the post-type sleeper. When he first came in, he was the hot thing of that day. And Casey, you're all over this. This is your kind of
Yeah.
thing, to pay attention to the prospects. When he first came in, everybody was very excited about him. Pretty characteristically, a lot of pitchers can get knocked around. A lot of hitters
Right.
can struggle when they first come up. It happened. Then he seemed to perform pretty well for the Diamondbacks.
Right. But it's also why, if you remember when Jackson Holiday came up, 3 weeks ago, what did I say? If I had him, I would trade him.
Yep.
Because his value is never going to be higher than the day he debuts, because he can't live up to what people like. They expected Matt Holliday with speed from day one at 20 years old, or however old he was.
Right.
Like,
and in a redraft league, he's probably not going to get there.
He can't live up to that expectation. I would have done the same with Paul Skeens. Like,
Yep.
I think the guy's gonna be an absolute stud, but his value was never going to be as high as it was when he first got called up, unless he went and threw a perfect game with 19 strikeouts his first time.
So let's check in about Paul Skeens, because we had predicted what he was going to do in his first time out. I nailed the strikeout count, but he only went 4 innings.
Yeah, I said if he made it to 5, he was going to get 8 strikeouts. So I still feel like I was in there.
I
but
think you and I were right on in terms of
Ross was trying to say he was already the best pitcher in baseball, but
yes, well, that's not so much.
Now, to his credit, I think the bullpen came in and walked like both of the runners he left on in.
Right.
So there were 2 additional earned runs, but he wasn't efficient. But he will be. The guy's a monster. Like, I don't doubt that, but I think you could get such good players for him that it would be stupid not to trade him.
Okay, another comment coming in. The Yankees will find room for Verdugo. He won't be in the 4th spot, but he will be on the field. I mean, Verdugo he's a pretty underrated player.
I agree. And he's one of those kind of dirty lunchbox, the guy who does whatever it takes to get in at bat. There's nothing like flashy about him, but they're going to find time for him to play 3 to 4 games a week. He's not going to be playing 5 or 6 anymore.
Although we do have to keep in mind injuries can happen. I mean,
Stanton will get hurt. Judge will probably need a couple weeks off for his back.
So I think Verdugo is probably going to average 5 games a week.
He might.
I think it's a pretty good bet.
And he's a left-hander, so they need the left-handed balance.
Okay, so let's jump to prospects. You love prospects.
I do.
Give me the prospect landscape right now. Who's being looked at? I mean, like I'm sitting waiting on James Wood. When is he coming up?
Well, he should be up, but that's just me.
Right.
Somebody I've been talking about, and I talked about him earlier this week, was Aurelvis Martinez, the third baseman for Toronto, who's been just really freaking good. And right now it's Isaiah Kiner-Falefa and Kevin Biggio holding down those positions on Toronto with an offense that's struggling. So there's no reason he shouldn't be up. How about, you want to talk about a post-hype sleeper who's in the minors, Miguel Vargas. The cat came up last year in the major after
Was it last year or the year before?
2023. No, he got 256 at bats last year and batted below 200. This year he's batting almost 300, got 8 home runs, 8 stolen bases, a 1,000 OPS, and more walks than strikeouts, 30 to 29. Like, I mean, the Dodgers, talk about the rich getting richer. So you have him, Kobe Mayo. I think Kobe Mayo might have leapfrogged Jackson Holiday at this point in terms of the next call up for the O's because of his ridiculous power, 13 home runs. And here's another post-hype sleeper. Zach Veen was a top prospect outfielder for the Rockies last year, and he was atrocious in Double-A. And people said like batted 200, only 2 home runs. Well, this year he had a hand surgery in the offseason to correct, I guess, what was a chronic problem. 341, 5 home runs, 9 stolen bases, a 1,000 OPS so far in this season for Colorado. And if he gets the call, he's going to be playing half his games in Colorado. So that's somebody I would look at. Although Jordan Beck, who they called up last week, had a really good game last night. Maybe he's figuring it out. Pitching wise, Cade Povich is really good. Christian Scott, is that who got called up for the Mets?
Yep.
He's really good. So there's always prospects. I don't know. There's not a Paul Skeens coming up, another one, right? There's not one who's going to come up and take the world by storm. I don't think there's
Right. I
more
mean,
bat opportunities than there are pitching opportunities.
right. I mean, we've got Andrew Painter is that level of talent, but he's currently out for the season. So
Yeah,
it's
they're
like,
not. Well, he's actually going to be healthy enough to pitch in the second half of the season, from what I heard. But they're not going to. They're going to just take the full year for him and let him just focus on rehab.
right. Now, Zach Veen, I don't know if you remember this, but I actually drafted him in our keeper league last
Yeah,
year at the beginning. I was all excited about him, but then they, really started to talk about him having vulnerabilities in his swing, missing things. But I have a question for you. As you're going through the season and evaluating, there's so many prospects. How
yeah.
how how do you distinguish? I mean,
Well,
when you get excited about it, why? What's happening?
well, I rely heavily on other experts. Obviously, I start the season by kind of looking at who the top 100 prospects are that are kind of the unanimous selection, and if you pay enough attention, a lot of these guys are really good at ETA. When are they going to arrive? Right? Like there are some great prospects in the top 20. Ethan Salas comes to mind. He's an 17 or 18-year-old catcher in San Diego. Yes, he's a top 12 prospect. I know Christopher Atwater is a huge fan. I think he has him on his dynasty team, which is great, but he's probably not going to be up for 2 years. So I look at guys who are either double A or triple A, performing really, really well and have some pedigree, right? They're not old for their league. You don't want a 22-year-old in single A. You don't want a 24-year-old in double A, like those things. So I kind of try to mix and match. And I guess it's not Twitter anymore. I follow a few minor league reporters who follow different teams and just get their updates too. So that's kind of how I figure out who I'm going to look at.
I'm going to ask you about Luis Angel Acuna.
New York Mets.
What are you thinking about him at this point?
He's an Uncle Ted favorite. I don't see Uncle Ted on here.
Not yet.
I'm not as high on him as everybody else. I don't think he has legit power, but he's a speed guy and a good hit tool. But I'm not going to get really excited about Nico Horner when he gets called up.
Right.
Does that make sense? Like Nico Horner is a fantastic fantasy baseball player, and I'd want him on my team as a second baseman who runs and scores a lot of runs, but he's not one who's going to like give me the tingles when he's getting ready for promotion. And I put him in that category.
Not only that, but here's a bad sign for Luis Angel. Uncle Ted just cut him.
Oh, did he really?
He did.
That's
he did.
funny.
So, and that made me wonder why. So then listen, you got to pay attention to what's happening and you got to wonder if you see something like that, check it out. So I actually looked at the stats. I mean, it seems like he's just not hitting that well, but he has.
I don't think his hit tool is great. He's got speed.
Yeah, he's got a lot of speed. Now that being said, the younger brother of Ronald Acuna with all that speed, I could see, wanting him on your roster. Okay, we've got another question about another minor leaguer. Do you like Colson Montgomery? Is he still with the White Sox organization? Do I have that right?
Yeah, shortstop in the White Sox organization. Right. Another, yeah. I like the guy because he's a top prospect, but again, it's not one who's going to move the needle in terms of if in a dynasty league, like in our dynasty league, we can have 5 minor leaguers.
Yep.
Colson Montgomery's not going to be one of my 5. They have to be guys who there's Uncle Ted. They have to be guys who are going to fill all 5 categories or have the potential to fill all 5 categories for me if I'm going to hold on to them.
Now, Uncle Ted says, coming for first. Uncle Ted has surged into second place.
Are you in first?
No, I wish I was. I had been in second. I mean, a week and a half ago, I was in second. Now I'm in 6th. I had a rough week. The hitters just weren't hitting. I had Gaussman blow up. I had Christian Javier blow up. It just has not been a good week or two.
Yeah.
But Chris Atwater is the guy who's in first. And here you can see he says, bring it. It's going to be a battle. I do plan to be there for it, but man, it was a rough week. I could use some reinforcements. I
got hit pretty hard by the injury bug.
I mean, my injuries have been insane, but for a while I was making up for it with great performances. Like Max Muncy was carrying me. Mountcastle had a great week. Wilson Contreras was doing great before he got injured. Riley Green also was doing really great for me. So, but then they all hit a wall at the same time, and it's just, whew, it has been rough. All right, Case, let's talk about this. Is getting we're still not at Memorial Day. You know, Ross's cutoff for when he actually
Yeah, that's Ross's cutoff.
that's his cutoff.
Yeah.
You and I have, I think,
earlier cutoffs. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're
4 to
we're
6
past our
weeks.
cutoff.
I'm good. 6 weeks kind of tells me.
Right. So, who have you seen this year that you would trade for that you wouldn't have expected to trade for? Just give me
wouldn't have
one or
expected
two.
to trade for. Interesting.
Yeah.
How about Alec Boehm?
Yeah, seriously.
I mean, the
You
last
know what
month
helped
he's
him?
gotten 385 with 25 RBIs.
You wanna know what helped him most?
You cut him.
Me cutting him. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
I know.
Uh,
Bryson Stott has been awesome for the
yeah, here's a
Phillies.
guy that a lot of people would want to trade for that they wouldn't have expected to. Jared Jones, Uncle Ted says. I agree. He's been
Yeah.
amazing. Ranger Suarez, as I've already mentioned, but I would say that again. I think you want to buy in on him. Could he run out of gas? Yeah, but he doesn't look like he's going to be bad while he's doing it.
How about Chris Sale?
Oh, for sure. Although, actually, you know what? I would not have been surprised to be trading for Chris Sale. It's all about health with him. He pitches well every time that
He's
he pitches.
healthy. Yeah.
Chris Atwater says, my injuries have been brutal, but my fantasy guys all seem somewhat healthy. Oh, that's good and bad news, I suppose. I'm sorry, Chris, but as you know, I can probably help with actual real injuries, but I can't help with your fantasy team unless I can talk to them. I'm looking at other players that Jeremy Pena's a guy who jumps out at me as not a total surprise, but I mean, first of all, is he going to hit 354? I highly doubt that. But there's a lot of guys hitting huge numbers.
How about Josh Naylor? Speaking of your Guardians.
Yep.
Let's go to your Guardians. That guy's been a stud. Marcell Ozuna is another one. I talk about him every year. Like preseason, for some reason, I never put him in my top 20 outfielders, and he's always delivers. I think it's my ethics or morals or whichever one you want to say.
Right. Then there's guys like Julio Rodriguez. You know, he's obviously not performing the way we expect him to perform, way below it, in fact. But is there going to come a point where you would say, I do not want to trade for Julio Rodriguez?
Look, he's batting 300 over the last month.
Mm-hmm.
You know, 6 steals, 2 home runs, 12 runs scored. I mean, they're not eye-popping numbers, but it means he's figuring it out. And it means that, I mean, Matt Olson has been awful, but he's somebody I'd trade for right now. Manny Machado's been awful. Somebody else I would trade for right now because I fully expect them to figure it out. You know, they're not in the Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander age group where you're like, yeah, that's just father time.
Yeah. If you were in a trade situation though, where the trade was Alec Boehm for Manny Machado, which side would you take?
I would take Machado.
I would too, actually, but I'm much more hesitant about it than I thought I would be.
Yeah, no, I understand that completely. Yeah. Austin Riley's another guy I would trade for. Struggling.
100%. Uncle Ted says he'd go for Baum in this case, and I understand that it's almost 50-50 at this point. Uncle Ted says Kettle Marte going for 40 homers. Do you see that happening, Casey?
No, I see him going. What was his high a few years ago? 32 or 34? I forget what it was. I could see him getting there. I don't see him getting to 40. I do see him probably going on the IL at some point for a couple weeks. He seems to do that all the time.
But I mean, I will say this is clearly like one of those Kettle Marte good seasons.
Right. There, if you remember, God, this was in the 90s. I know you remember the player, but Howard Johnson, if you look at the third baseman for the Mets, if you look at his years, like I forget when it was odd or even. One was awful, the other was great. One was awful, the other was great. If you look at his player card, it was so funny. And it's maybe Marte is one of those guys who just he really tries one year, then he gets comfortable. Then he really tries the next year. I don't know. But Kettle Marte's been an all-star. I mean, he's in a great hitter's park. So
this is jumping back to players that you'd be surprised to be trading for. Jonah Heim. I actually was high on him when it seemed like nobody else was. And that's partly because I experienced it the year before. I picked him up and he did surprisingly well. Chris Atwater says, tough to find a catcher like that about Jonah Heim.
How about Ryan Jeffers, speaking of a catcher?
Yep.
297 home runs in Minnesota.
Right. And like I want you to be honest. Did you even know his name coming into the season?
No, he
I
wasn't
didn't
anywhere
either.
near a list of mine.
I didn't know who he was. And that's going to happen every year. There's going to be guys like that. Who are some guys that you would want to trade away that you're like, I've had enough? You're
That I
saying
don't.
you would trade for Matt Olson, but like, could you see some managers just being like, I got to move on. I can't do this anymore.
This is going to shock people because in a dynasty league, I never would, but in a redraft league, Yordan Alvarez.
Oh, wow.
Because you can get a ton for him, and he's at best a 4-category contributor. So I think you can get overpaid for what he brings to the team. I'm not saying that, but just
that's in a
looking at
redraft league, though.
Yeah, I wasn't prepared for this question, so that's not like something I did a lot of prep for. But another one I might do that for would be, I think it's time I might cut bait on Corey Seager.
Yeah.
If I had him. Certainly.
What about Lindor?
Lindor, say what you want. In the last 30 days, he's still a top 30 player.
Yeah.
Because he's knocked in 19 and scored 17, 6-6 in the stolen bases and home runs. Like, his batting average is terrible. So I'm not getting rid of him.
I don't think I'd get rid of him. I also don't think I would directly go out and buy low on him. You know what I mean?
No, I do agree with. Well, no, I shouldn't say I might. Who knows?
I could in the right circumstances. It depends. Okay. Chris Atwater. Oh, we missed one here. Chris Atwater says, I like Marte a lot. Not one of the guys I have rostered. All right. Corey Lee. What do you know about him, Case?
I don't know much.
Yeah, it's pretty rare, but I saw that name and I was like, what? So I'll tell you what, you look up Corey Lee, tell us what the news is on him, or Uncle Ted, you weigh in for it. But Chris Atwater is saying that some guys that he would move on from are Dansby Swanson and Lane Thomas, which is exactly what he did. There is something very freeing in fantasy baseball about this time of year. You get to a point where you're like, I don't have to put up with this anymore. This was around the time, I think it was about 2 weeks later that I cut Jose Berrios last season. I was just like, nope, I can't. You're clogging up even just a roster spot. I can't even do it anymore. Okay, Uncle Ted wants a follow-up on this. You're cutting bait with Corey Seager. Interesting.
I'm trading him away. Yeah, I'm not
trading him away.
I'm not cutting bait in like dropping him. But if you think about it, he is similar to Yordan Alvarez, maybe not as good of a pure hitter as Yordan Alvarez is, or as I shouldn't say that. He might be as good. He's just not as imposing. He doesn't look as scary as Yordan Alvarez does in the box because Yordan Alvarez crushes lefties. I can't understand why anybody pitching to the Houston Astros would ever use a lefty reliever. Kyle Tucker and Yordan Alvarez have higher numbers against lefties than they do against righties, but they always throw lefties at them. But anyway, Corey Seager is going to get hurt again at some point this season. It's just his MO. And he's not going to contribute in speed, and he's struggling right now.
That's the thing is I don't know how, sometimes we give Ross a hard time for certain things, or he'll give us a hard time about certain things. One of the things I think you and I both definitely balked at was him saying Corey Seager was the number one shortstop.
Yes.
We were both like, what? Because he gives no steals and he's injury prone. So then if he doesn't hit for average or he doesn't hit for as much power, he's instantly a back-end shortstop at best.
But his name can get you value back, which is why I said I would trade him. Because there are plenty of Rosses in the world who still believe he's the number one shortstop. And so you might be able to get a package of players that helps you in certain ways.
All right, let's talk about somebody who has really completely lived up to the hype. In fact, he's our cover boy today, Gunnar Henderson.
Oh my.
You asked the question, is he the best player in fantasy baseball? So I want you to answer. I want you to give your answer first.
No, I don't think he is, but there's not a weakness in his game, and he does run. He's athletic. He plays shortstop and third base, which gives you multi-positional eligibility. He's young, 23, I think. And he's one of those, he's an effort guy. Like if you ever, I live on the East Coast, so I'm a Yankees fan, which means, and I live close enough to Baltimore where I get mass in the Mid-Atlantic Sports Network, so I can see a lot of Orioles games. and it's just a fun team that everybody plays hard. And he and Adley Rutschman are kind of the leaders of the team, even though they're both young. Uncle Ted asked, would Gunnar be a first round pick if we redrafted? I think he would be, honestly.
Oh yeah, and especially in our dynasty league.
Especially like I drafted. I got Fernando Tatis in the second round. I would much rather have Gunnar Henderson than Fernando Tatis right now. Mm-hmm. But I don't think I would not draft Juan Soto. But ask Ross, who has Julio Rodriguez, or let's see who else went. Corbin Carroll's been awful, Uncle Ted. You drafted him, I think, in the first round, didn't you? Would you rather have Gunnar Henderson or Corbin Carroll right now if you redrafted? Those sorts of things. Dynasty is a little bit different, but Gunnar's 23. Like, I'd rather have him than Garrett Cole was drafted in the first round. Spencer Strider was drafted in the first round. That's insane.
Ross is going to like this one. I'm sorry you aren't here for this, Ross, but
rubbing me in.
Ellie De La Cruz is the fantasy MVP. Listen, it's hard to argue, even though you could look and you could say, okay, Ohtani's actually the number 1 ranked player, and he's obviously a massively great player, but Ellie De La Cruz with 26 steals.
And Ellie De La Cruz plays 2 positions, and Ohtani clogs up your
utility spot. It makes a difference.
Yeah, now the 260 batting average or whatever he has, I'm not sure what it is. I'd have to look.
258 right now. Yep.
253 I have.
Oh, I don't know why that is. One of us does.
Oh no, I'm looking at the last 30 days.
There we go. But who else is even in the discussion? I mean, you can say Ohtani, the hitter. Mookie Betts has certainly lived up to expectations. Bobby Witt Jr. There we go.
Kyle Tucker, I think, is going to be even better going forward because remember he started super slow.
Yeah.
And then Gunnar Henderson's in the top 10.
You know who we've got to talk about potentially is Juan Soto.
Again, the issue with Juan Soto is the lack of speed.
Right.
Now he has 4 steals, but
anybody like that, I'm not expecting to end up the number 1 player. Now, here's a guy who could easily end up the number 1 player. That was Aaron Judge. He's starting to heat up.
Oh my gosh, he's crushing the ball. He reached base 8 straight times coming into today's game, and they won 5-0. So
he's just a monster. When people say to me that James Wood is the next Aaron Judge, I'm like, man, I hope so, because
that would be nice, wouldn't
it? Anybody would like the next Aaron Judge, but I mean, Aaron Judge is currently the 16th ranked player, and he hasn't even been playing that well for him.
Yeah, but I think, and then you have to look at the pitching side, and you got Ranger Suarez and Tyler Glass now, who've just been amazing.
Yeah.
Dylan Cease has been everything the Padres could have wanted when they traded the world for him, and it makes you angry when you're a Yankees fan and you were like, trade for Dylan Cease, but that's not the purpose of the show.
Another guy who's been a great rebound year, and actually I think both of us thought he would rebound, is Aaron Nola.
Yep.
He's been really great. From a fantasy perspective, I wouldn't say that he's like a dominant ace or anything, but you got him as your
number 2 pitcher, that's awesome.
It's outstanding. But you're also right about Max Fried. If you look at his numbers, and this is for a guy who's not even striking out a batter or an inning, but his numbers have been great.
Yeah.
Cole Ragans is somebody you really liked. His ERA.
I like him. He struggled because he had 2 or 3 bad outings there last month, but
right. And he's young, so he could have times like that. I'm just looking at players who have really I still can't believe Ronald Blanco. Like, is he going to keep this up?
He's suspended for the next 10 games.
Oh, well, I didn't see that. What happened?
Sticky substance. And according to the umpire, it was the worst case of it he's ever seen.
Oh no.
Yeah.
That sounds like rated X.
Yeah.
I don't know what was going on there. I don't want to know.
Clay Holmes still has a 0 ERA, by the way.
Is that right?
Over a strikeout per inning, a 0 ERA and a .98 whip with 12 for 12 in save opportunities.
By the way, I think we need to talk again about Mason Miller. We talked about him last week, but
18 innings, 38 strikeouts. You mean that guy?
What are the chances that he's going to be in an Oakland uniform by the end of this year? We'll wrap up on this, but I can't imagine.
I don't like if you were the Baltimore Orioles, right? I'm going to use the Orioles as an example every time, right? You don't have a good bullpen right now. You just don't. You have Felix Bautista, who was the most dominant closer in the world last year, out for the year. You go and get Craig Kimbrell, who has not been good. You have 4 or 5 prospects in the minors who are all considered like top level.
Trade one of them for Mason Miller.
Send them. You don't think Oakland would rather have a really good young position player than a dominant closer right now with where they're rebuilding? And in 2 years, they want to be in Las Vegas or wherever they are. Imagine if they had a Kobe Mayo type when they open the stadium in Vegas, right? Imagine.
Yeah, I just think it's hard for teams to let
Heston
go.
Kierstead.
It's just hard for teams to let go. But if you hoard them all, you've got to send somebody away to get a guy like Mason. Miller.
I heard somebody once say, what's better than prospects? Parades. Parades are better than prospects, right? Like nice. Baltimore hasn't won a World Series since the 70s when they had Palmer and all those guys.
It's totally true. They should go for it. We'll finish up on this. Uncle Ted said Shota Imanaga is Rookie of the Year. He has a .96 ERA. He does.
He's absolutely the Rookie of the Year at this point. Yeah.
At this point, I think we totally agree. Now, Chris Atwater says, if I remember correctly,
I did love Bobby Witt Jr. He was my number one shortstop.
He was also my number one. So if I think you might have been remembering Ross. He had Corey Seager above Bobby Witt Jr. I can guarantee Casey and I didn't. In fact, in our league, Julio Rodriguez went right before Bobby Witt Jr. And the guy who picked Bobby Witt Jr. was like, he was upset about it because we had a draft snafu. And I was like, actually, I think you're better off that way. Here's the Corey Lee stats that we were looking for. Thank you, Uncle Ted. Catcher, 302 batting average, 4 homers, 835 OPS. All right. These are the underrated guys you got to look for.
He also turns 26 this year. So I always worry about somebody who's here. There you go.
What's that?
Oh, you can't read it. Shortstops, my ranking.
There it is. Bobby Witt, elite. Wasn't he? Yep. Y'all equals Ross. I see. We got lumped in with Ross.
Thanks, Ross.
Even when he's not here. Well, listen, I like being lumped in with Ross sometimes, but not always. In any case, guys, it has been a pleasure. Casey, this was a great show. Great doing this with you. And we'll be back next week. That's Thursdays at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. Bring your questions. And, we know fantasy baseball, it changes every week. We got to keep on top of it. Pay attention to your waiver wire. See who got cut. There's all kinds of crazy things happening out there. So keep it up. Guys, looking forward to seeing you next week. Put your comments below and we'll get back to you as soon as possible.